Every YouTube golf coach is selling you a putting stroke fix. I analyzed 350 million tracked putts. Your putting stroke is fine. The problem boils down to you don't know where you're losing strokes and where you're gaining them, because not all putts are created equal. And by the end of this video, you will know exactly which ones to practice and for how long. That's a bold claim, so let me back it up. I pulled my research data from 3 sources: ShotScope, Arccos, and Mark Broadie's research. Most putting content or putting instruction looks at this data wrong. They show you make percentages and tell you to practice more, and these videos get a ton of views. I would know they're the most viewed videos on my Instagram page. But just knowing that information is not enough. What you actually need is answers to 2 questions. Where are you losing strokes, and where can you realistically get them back? Because if you're like me, you probably don't have a ton of time to practice. You might get out to a putting green once every week, once every other week, and so you want that limited time to be incredibly focused on the things that actually move the needle. And not knowing what those things are is why you can practice for years and never get any better. Down below, you'll see a PDF that I built that ranks every single distance from a strokes gain perspective. We'll walk through that later in the video, but go ahead and download it now if you've got a second. Now let me show you why your stroke is not the problem. A scratch golfer will beat a tour pro on the greens in more than 30% of their rounds. A golfer who averages 80 will beat a tour pro in 20% of their rounds on the green. And don't worry, if you shoot in the 90s, you will beat a tour pro on the greens 10% of the time. But think about this. Somebody who has maybe the worst mechanics you've ever seen and averages 90 will beat a tour pro who has pure mechanics 10% of the time on the greens. A great example of this is a PGA Tour pro with all of the technology they have available and a caddy, and they've played this course before and they've got a green reading book and aim point. They only make 50% of their 8-footers. They make 40% from 10 feet, 23% from 15 feet, 15% from 20 feet, and only 7% from 30 feet. Another way to look at these numbers is that they miss the opposite amount. So they're missing 50% of their 8-footers. They're missing 93% of their 30-footers. If we get a little closer to the hole, they make 88% of their 4-footers, 77% of their 5-footers, and 66% of their 6-footers. So if the gap between you and a PGA Tour pro are not that big on the greens in all reality, why does every single YouTube coach focus so much on putting stroke? Well, those things are easy to teach and showcase and monetize, but showcasing how you're supposed to practice, as you can tell by how many subscribers I have, is not exactly the sexiest thing. So if your stroke is in the gap, where are you losing strokes? There are 2 ways to look at each putting distance on a green: raw loss and leverage. Raw loss is simple. Per round from this distance, how many shots do you leak versus your handicap average? For example, most golfers make almost nothing from 25 feet, but if you 3-putt 2 out of 4 times that you have a 25-footer, the difference between that and your handicap average is going to be your raw loss. It's a pretty straightforward calculation. Now let's compare that to what leverage is, because leverage is different. Leverage asks, of the amount of shots that I'm losing from this distance, how much can I realistically get back by simply practicing with the time that I already have? This is where it gets uncomfortable for a lot of us, because raw loss and leverage kind of clash. For example, early this season, I was really struggling from 4 to 8 feet, but I didn't have a ton of time to get out to putting greens to practice reading those, so I kind of just ate my losses. Now, as we move more into summer, any chance I can get out to a putting green to roll those putts, I am. Or let's look at 25 to 40 feet. A lot of golfers 3-putt in this zone. So if we're looking at raw loss, yeah, you're going to lose a couple shots from this distance simply because you're going to 3-putt a few times. And if you can only get out to a putting green once every other week, then your leverage for improving that probably isn't really high. Now let's look at, say, 4 to 10 feet, where if your raw loss is really high and you're missing lines, man, you can work on that in your office. Your leverage is super high to improve that thing. Some distances are raw loss and high leverage, like we just talked about, those shorter putts. Work on those when you can. Some distances have high raw loss, but low leverage, like those really, really long putts. Well, spend a few minutes when you're warming up and make the most of that time. And now some are low raw loss, like, for example, 2-footers. Don't go practice a bunch of 2-footers over and over again. Just tap them in. Now, from a general perspective, there are 2 zones that you can improve on the most to move your handicap the most. The first zone is 4 to 10 feet, where we're going to make a decent amount of putts. And this isn't so you can make a ton more birdies. This is actually primarily so you can make more up and down successfully. The second zone is kind of that sneaky 3-putt zone, 25 to 40 feet. You can hit a great approach into a par 4 and walk away with a bogey simply because you weren't practicing this specific zone. Most golfers actually practice that warm up inside 25 feet, stretch it out a little bit so that you can start getting used to feeling different speeds from kind of that awkward 25 to 40 foot distance. Those two zones actually cascade into each other because if you get really good from 4 to 10 feet, then that actually takes a lot of pressure off the lag putt. And I actually think you lag putt it closer when you know that your putting from close is better, if that makes sense. And you'll notice that 10 to 25 feet is not very high on this list. That's because the three putt avoidance from this zone is pretty good for every single handicap group, and the make rate is pretty bad for every single handicap group. So it's kind of this nebulous zero land where unless you're Jordan Spieth, you're not really going to do much from 10 to 25 feet to gain a ton of shots. And like I said, most of us are incredibly limited on time, so why would we waste our time on something that's low leverage? One more quick data point before we jump into the framework. Looking at the Arccos database, for every single handicap group, the difference between the top 10% of putters in each handicap group and the bottom 10% of putters in each handicap group is 4.28 shots per round for scratch golfers, 6.16 strokes per round for 10 handicaps, and 7.61 for 20 handicaps. What that means is as a 20 handicap, if you are a bottom 10% putter, you are leaving 7 shots a round on the table by not being in the top 10%. So this doesn't mean that you have to go out and be the best putter in the world for your handicap group. This just means that if you get to average, you're going to gain like 3 shots right there. And as you'll see in the PDFs down below, being an average putter is honestly not that hard. It really just comes down to not 3-putting and making everything within 4 feet. I'm also preaching to the choir here because I'm thinking about how bad my putter feels right now, but ultimately I know I don't have to go out and be the world's best putter to play really good golf. I just have to not miss greens and then not 3-putt. It's not that crazy. And it is way easier said than done, but this simplifies our practice so much. If we want to get better at putting, we've got to practice for at least 30 minutes a week. So we're going to start with just 30 minutes a week, 2 different practice modes with 4 total drills. We're going to spend 14 minutes on 4 to 10 feet, 11 minutes on 25 to 45-ish feet, 4 minutes from 10 to 20 feet, and 1 minute inside 3 feet. There are 2 ways to practice: block practice and random practice. Block practice for putting is going to be setting down a mirror or a gate and checking our alignment and working on that, hitting the same putt to the same target over and over and over again. This type of practice is great for building a movement. It is not great for testing it, which is what we use random practice for. This is going to be us putting to a different hole or from a different angle to the same hole. We're never hitting the same putt 2 times in a row. One of the biggest mistakes I see on every practice green in America is somebody standing there over a 10-footer, hitting it again and again and again. I want to ask you, when have you ever hit a second putt to the same target on the golf course, outside of a scramble with a mulligan? This isn't me getting on you. I promise I fall into this trap too. But if you want to actually get better at putting, which is reading the green correctly the first time and hitting the putt correctly the first time, you've got to practice doing those things. This is also backed up by a ton of research. I'll link all that research down below. But random practice in every part of your game, or really in every skill discipline that you can think of in life, is going to translate better to the course in every single discipline. All right, I'm going to flash the 4 drills on the screen. You can take a screenshot, or if you want to go download it, just go down to the description. Drill 1 is going to be the random ladder. This is our conversion zone from 4 to 10 feet. We're going to place 1 putt from 4 to 10 feet every foot and hit them in random order. Then change the angle or change the hole and run it again. We're going to do this 4 times for a total of 24 putts, and a scratch golfer should be shooting for 18 made putts. The baseline for a 10 handicap is going to be 15 made putts, and the baseline for a 20 handicap is going to be 10 made putts. Next, we're going into that lag zone. We're going to play a 9-ball random game where we're placing 9 balls between 25 and 45 feet, all hitting them to different holes or the same hole, but ultimately the goal is to get all 9 of them within 3 feet of the hole, or a putter length. For a scratch golfer, we're going to try to do this 7 times. A 10 handicap, we're trying to get 5 of 9 inside that 3-foot circle, and a 20 handicap, we are trying to get 3 out of 9. The nice thing about all 4 of these drills is you can actually track your progress over time, and if you've got a little bit more than 30 minutes, you can stay on that drill until you complete it to your handicap level. Now we're going to that death zone of 5 to 20 feet. We're going to take 5 balls. We're going to just try to make all 5 from random spots. Keep track of how many you make over time. This is kind of just like a fun one to get out of the lag putting or really trying to make it zone. Anything in this zone is bonus, but this also helps with green reading. Drill 4 you can do out at the putting green, or you can do it at home. I'm able to do it in my office out to the hallway. We're going to place a ball at 6, 9, and 12 feet. We're actually going to putt to a coin instead of a hole, with the goal of just barely rolling over that coin. This is not only teaching you to keep your ball on line, but it's also teaching you how to have the proper make rate speed because of the slower a ball comes into the hole, the better chance it has of going in. The capture size of the hole gets bigger. Now, this is a phenomenal way to start working on your putting and tracking your improvement, but there is one catch. This is the right framework for the average. Odds are you're probably not average. You might be an above average putter overall, but you struggle from 3 to 5 feet, or a below average putter who just struggles from outside of 50. This plan is a one size fits all, and in order for you to get the most out of your time, you have to know where you're actually leaking shots. Option one is to manually track all your putts. I've got a simple stat tracker down below that you can also download. It'll take a few minutes after every single round, but you'll get a general idea of how good your putting is from certain distances. Option number two is to use the app that we built called Play Ready Golf. It takes the amount of time that you have, the facilities you have access to, and the data that you input, which only takes about 30 seconds a hole to get full strokes gained, and it builds out a plan based on all that information. So no matter if you've got just 15 minutes in your office or you've got an hour out at a driving range and a chipping green, it's going to build a plan using leverage so that you get the most out of your time. Best of all, these plans adapt and get harder as you get better. So just like if you wanted to continue getting stronger, you would lift heavier weights. Same idea here. And if you've made it to this point in the video, I've never put this code out publicly. You can use code ISAAC, ISAAK, for $20 off every single year for the rest of your life. I figured if you made it to this point in a random practice putting video, you probably deserve at least that. But jump in there, start a 7-day free trial. If you absolutely hate it, at least screenshot the plan so you have some kind of structure moving forward. Overall though, the point is that you need your data before you can actually focus your time on the right areas. 3 big takeaways from today. Putting is not necessarily all about stroke. Your stroke's probably fine. Second, raw loss and leverage are different. The amount of time that you put into something should match up with the amount of leverage that you have. And finally, random practice beats block practice when it comes to improving your scoring. Everything that I just told you is not just true for putting, it's true for everything. You should be seeking the highest leverage areas and utilizing random practice so that it actually transfers over to the course. The reason you're practicing the wrong putts is the reason you're practicing the wrong everything. And I hate to say it, but the whole range is rigged against you. I made a video about that. You can watch it right here.